So you are originally from Hartford, Connecticut, correct?
Actually, I grew up in a small town north of Hartford called Windsor.
Okay.
It was about 10 miles north of Hartford, and it was a typical small town. It was a nice place to grow up. We had woods, and we had brooks, and a lot of open space and fresh air. But I was born in Hartford. Yes.
Did you always know that acting was something you were interested in, or did you play make-believe a lot when you were a kid in the yard, or how did that first come around?
That's funny. That's the same question that I was asked. That was the first question from the other interview I did an hour ago. Yes, I was a class clown, which you'll find true of a lot of actors, and always wanted to be the center of attention, and then most of us are from kind of I shouldn't say this. Many of us are from messed up backgrounds. My parents were divorced when I was 2, and then I was living with my grandmother, and then my mother remarried. My stepfather kicked me out, and I went back to live with my grandmother. And of course, that's a lot of us were from backgrounds like that. Not all of us. So we needed attention, and I know I started doing in the 5th grade. I did hand sprinkler and the silver skates, and I thought I was good at it. And then in high school, did some plays, and I always was got the most laughs, and I always had to be funny. And then I didn't do well in college and didn't have any money, so I joined the Air Force, and that was great duty. I was in Lodges Air Force Base in the Azores, and we had a little theater group there, and I did about 5 or 6 plays with them, and I really enjoyed it. And then I thought I would go back into radio and TV, but I did a summer stock production of West Side Story when I came back to the States. And some of the actors said, "Oh, you ought to come to New York and try it out." So I thought I would give it a year or two, and I did come to New York, and I'm still here.
and what a experience it has been since then. I mean, so let's talk back for a second. So when you were in the Air Force, how was that experience for you?
That was one of the best choices I made in my life. I reinvented myself. And I was always Ronnie, the kid Ronnie, and I came out Ron MILLKIE. I had great duty. I was a DJ, and I played all the records of the day, and then I did sports on TV. And then at night, we'd rehearse for our little theater shows. And I had a lot of fun. And it was a great time.
That's fantastic.
Great time in my life.
So talk to me about West Side Story. What was it about that really put that in your mind that this is something you could do for a long time?
The reason I'm laughing is because I was so bad in that show.
I don't believe it.
Oh, come on. I couldn't sing. I couldn't dance. What was I doing in that show? But I was sort of known as a radio announcer. I was working at a radio station in Connecticut, in Torrington, Connecticut, WBZY. And so he hired me just because I was like a known personality. And I played one of the Jets action, and they had me in a ballet. I couldn't dance. They had me sing Officer Krupke. I couldn't sing. But I did meet these actors that were brought in for the leading roles from New York, and they said, "Yeah, you got to come to New York," and they just got the spark going. And I did come to New York. I studied at the neighborhood playhouse, and then the next year I got into a hit off-Broadway show, and I struggled for many, many years, and I kept thinking, God, should I leave this? Should I leave acting and try to get a job in radio? I'd have to go to some small town maybe first and work my way up and be, a radio announcer again, be on a TV show. And then it came to the point where it was too late. And I said, well, I guess I'm just going to be an actor till I die. And then Friday the 13th came, I had already struggled for many, many years. And then that came 1979. We had no idea where that was going. And then since then, I've done 14 horror movies, and some other, sort of like my career. I don't want to say took off, but it lifted. And so I said, oh, I'm going to stick to in the business, and that's how it happened.
Well, you know what? I mean, it's one of those things when you're in journalism or some sort of other type of entertainment, to switch to acting, it almost seems like, in theory, it would be a natural switch, but it's two very different fields. Did you find much difficulty in switching from radio broadcast or journalism or DJing to then going into portraying characters and trying to develop a character?
Well, there were a lot of jobs in between. I remember I sold Filter Queen vacuum cleaners for a while, and did a lot of, oh my gosh, the years as a struggling actor, bartending, waiter, working as a maitre d', cleaning apartments, just everything I could do. Department store detective, all this stuff. And so it really was after the Air Force, I really didn't have a field, a particular field that I was really being able to make a living in. So, no, it wasn't that much of a transition.
All right, so let's start talking about Friday the 13th. So, do you remember how you first learned about the casting or the audition for it? And what was the audition process like for Officer Dorf?
Yes, it's an interesting story. You talk about chance or, whatever. It was a rainy day, and I had bought Variety. Usually I would buy Backstage newspaper on this day, Thursday. And for some reason, I bought the Daily Variety, and I was having lunch, and I saw an ad in the back of the paper, now filming Friday the 13th. The famous ad with the glass shattering and the letters Friday the 13th coming through the shattering glass. And it's directed by Sean Cunningham. Now, I had worked for Sean Cunningham before, and so I called him immediately and said, and it happened to be, he was home that day because it was raining. And I said, Ron, look, he said, Ron, how you doing? I said, I see you're directing a movie called Friday the 13th. Anything for me in it? Of course, as an actor. And then he said, oh, Ron, we're already shooting, And I said, okay, Sean, you take care next time. And I was just ready to hang up. This was long before emails. It was payphone. And I hear, Ron. And that 1 or 2 seconds made a big difference because he said it loud enough that I said, yeah, I'm still here. And he says, you know what? There is a part that you could possibly do. I was going to play that part. Sean Cunningham was going to play the part. So he said, I'll overnight you. This is long before emails. I'll overnight you the scene, and you can come on up to the Boy Scout camp where we're filming in Blairstown, New Jersey, and audition. So I did just that, and I had the lines pretty much down, and I auditioned with, they had already gotten their parts. Harry Crosby, Janine Taylor, I'm trying to think who else
Was Kevin Bacon in the scene at that
Adrian,
point?
yeah, Kevin Bacon, Adrian King, Rodney Morgan. Yeah, they were all there. And so I read with them. And afterwards there was silence. And Harry Crosby said, I'm unduly impressed. So he liked it, but Sean didn't say anything. So we walked to the top of the hill. I was going to take the bus back to New York. And he said, you got the part. Well, learn your part. And you're going to film 2 days next week. And at the time, it was just a job. I didn't know. Who knew Friday the 13th, if it's even going to get a theatrical release, or maybe no one will ever see it. So no one knew. And then, I was on the set. We only did 2 takes because Sean moved very quickly. It was low budget, $600,000 at the time. That wasn't really so low budget back then in 1979, but compared to today, I just saw Avatar. I heard that was the budget was $250 million,
right?
Something like that.
Yep.
Yeah. So, that's the story. It was. I've told it many times, and it was serendipity. It was just luck. It was, who knows, something that happened, and I'm grateful. It happened because I have when I leave this planet, I'll have something. People will remember me for something.
Well, I'm sure that
And
there will be many more people that remember you for much more than that, because you have since then gotten involved with giving back to the acting community, and I do want to talk about that in a moment. But to stay on Friday the 13th for a little bit longer here, so when you guys had that movie come out, did you instantly know that it was a hit, or did it take a little while before it started to get the cult following?
well, it got bad reviews. The worst one was Gene Siskel, who told people not to go see it, and he really hated the movie. And but it made a lot of money that year. In fact, it turned out to be the top. This is amazing. The top moneymaker of 1980 was Friday the 13th. This is including all the top Hollywood movies, big budget movies. It was the biggest moneymaker of the year, and it sort of like nothing happened for 10 years or so, but it was you guys. It was word of mouth that made it a classic, because the critics didn't like it. But let me ask you how old you were when you first saw it.
Oh my gosh. I was probably 6, so I want to say 1996.
Yes. How old were you?
6 years old.
6 years old. How did you get to see it at 6 years old?
It was on cable. I kind of snuck it on.
Oh my God. Well, see, that's the answer. All of the fans, the real fans, saw it when they were real young, at a very impressionable age. Now, you're really the youngest person I've ever talked to who saw it at 6 years old. I've heard some say 8 years old they saw it. They saw it in their friend's basement. It was, their parents were forbidden. Parents said you cannot see that movie. And of course, when something's forbidden, it becomes that much more exciting.
Yes.
And so most of the people who are real fans today were very young when they saw Friday the 13th. Usually it was years after. It did not get a cult following for many, many years. So that's what happened. People were forbidden to see it, and you all wanted to see it, of course, like anybody. So you can't do this, and you're going to do it. So that's what happened. I didn't do the conventions until I was making a film for Dante Tomaselli called Satan's Playground, which was quite good, but nobody's seen it. Nobody talks about it. And guess what I played? A cop. And it was about the Jersey Devil. And we were filming in 17 degrees below zero.
Oof.
I'm not exaggerating at all. At nighttime up in New Jersey, in the Pine Barrens, I guess it was called. And so Ellen Sandweiss was in the movie. She was from another horror movie. You may remember it. I don't know. Sam Romney directed it, early movie. And she said, "Are you going to the horror convention?" I said, "What horror convention?" And she says, "Well, there's a horror convention in Parsippany, New Jersey. It's called Chiller. Haven't you been doing the conventions?" I said, "No, I never knew any of the conventions." So that's how I heard about it. And I called, she had me call Kevin Clements, who ran the Chiller conventions, which are pretty big. Mm-hmm. And he says, "Yeah, Ron, we'd love to have you." And so it was the next day. I brought some of my students. I was teaching acting, and some assistants with me. There was a big line, in front of my table. And I was getting a little annoyed. I said, "What are you people doing? What do you want?" And they said, "We're waiting for you." And I said, "What? Really?" And that's how it happened.
Well, Ron, that's got to make you feel good, though, that many people are that still impacted by Officer Dorf, that they still want to meet you.
Yeah, it was more of a surprise and astonishment. And then I knew what I could do, and I attended many conventions, and the fans only grew, since that time. And so I'm appreciative, and it was nice.
And you'd mentioned Ellen Sandweiss, obviously, from The Evil Dead 1981.
There you go. See, yeah, that's right.
Now, is there kind of a community of those of you that are in those sort of slasher films? As you mentioned, now you have been to these conventions, you probably see some of these faces frequently. Other people that were involved in the movies in the early 1980s for those horror movies.
I do. I see them at the conventions, at the horror conventions.
Hmm.
Yes.
That's going to be a nice
And
community to be a part of.
I'm sorry?
That must be a nice community to be a part of.
Oh, it is. It absolutely is. We have a lot of fun. I was in London this past February of last year, and I was there with Bill Randolph, who's a buddy of mine. He lives in Manhattan, not too far from me. And let me see, she was in Friday the 13th too. Anne Marie Louise. Oh my God, I can't think of her name. Yeah, and so we had a lot of fun in London. And I saw the city, and then we had it was a Comic Con, so it was huge, and we have a good time, you know. And we did the tour. We had time to see the whole city of London, and a lot of fans, and it was very enjoyable. And this June, we're going to be at the actual Camp Crystal Lake in Blairstown, which is the Boy Scout camp in which Friday the 13th was filmed in 1979. And so that's going to be a big event, and I'll see everybody there. Ari Lehman, who played Jason, of course, Betsy is gone, and you know, Janine Taylor and Adrian King and Bill and I and Harry Manfredi, who wrote the brilliant sound score. You really can't call it a score; it was sound. It was soundtrack. When you think about it, he talks about it, how what brilliance he came up with that sound, you know, whatever it was, you know.
Yeah.
And that was all Harry, yeah. And all these things contributed to it being becoming a classic horror movie.
Yeah, and I think
So I'm looking, yeah.
those menacing sounds and those, I think that almost just added to the movie that you weren't entirely sure what that sound was. It wasn't a normal horror soundtrack,
Right.
you know. Yeah, so that's great.
Yeah, that was the brilliance of Harry, you know, sure.
All right, so talking a little bit more about life after Friday the 13th. You have now got back into teaching some of the younger actors, and what's that meant to you to be able to get a part of the next generation of actors?
Yeah, that's how I made my living, and it really wasn't connected too much to Friday the 13th. I was first approached to speak at the Waldorf Astoria about acting, and it was a models convention called New York. It was called the Modeling Association of America, and from there, it was a big success. And I did a little seminar, and then we did a workshop, and it was a big success. And I met all these women, mostly women, who were former models. A couple were Miss World, Miss America, and now they went back to their home cities and opened little charm and modeling schools. And so I started traveling around the country doing these acting seminars, and that was very lucrative. And teaching the young people, yes, it was very exciting. And I don't remember her, but someone in Tennessee told me that Reese Witherspoon was in one of these workshops.
No kidding.
I never knew that. Yeah. And then a couple of others. Let me see. Kerr Smith, he was a TV actor on Dawson's Creek and did others. And to this day, he's still doing TV. And Lacey Chabert, she was on a lot of TV shows, Party of Five, and so forth. Most of, I would say, 90% of them I never heard from again. And some of them came to New York. I introduced them to a soap opera casting director, and then from there, I met a woman named Linda Bennett, and she had her own little conventions called New York Models Contracts, and then I would travel around with her and made even more money. And these were she brought in agents, really big agents from the top agencies in New York City, you know, Ford, Wilhelmina, and top agencies from Milan and all over the world. And we had crowds of 800 to 1,000 people. And then I would do the little workshops after the weekend, and then I'd go back and do another one. So that's how I started making money. And then I was teaching at Hofstra University, and I was bringing in students from those classes to my New York classes. So that's the way it went. However, the pandemic really hurt hurt me in as much as my classes have dropped off. A lot of them don't want to, from Long Island, they don't want to come into the city. The questions arise: who's wearing a mask? Who's been vaccinated? So the pandemic has hurt me in as much as making a living.
Well, let's hope that now that the conventions are going to be able to come back through and people will be looking to get more in-person instructions, that I'll pick up real quick for you here again.
Yes,
yeah.
I hope so. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now there's a story online that I've heard about you. I wanted to check with you to see if it's true. It says that you and Al Pacino were working together at a theater in the early 70s. Any truth to that?
Yes, it's totally true.
What's that story?
Yeah, Al and I were, in fact, I tell the story that I ran into Al, had it been about 7 years ago. I live in Midtown Manhattan, and he was hanging out with a couple of his buddies. And I said, Al, do you remember when we both worked for the Swift messenger service? In those days, it was on foot. And I said, for $1.65 an hour.
Oh my God.
And he said, no, Ron, $1.35 an hour. Yeah.
What were you guys doing? So you were a messenger service? Was that like the 70s text messaging, or what was that?
No, we didn't have anything like that back then. We ran messages on foot.
My goodness.
Messages to different people. And I don't remember specifically too much. I know we were taking the subway a lot and running around. Then we'd meet for coffee afterwards and talk about actors. It's sort of ironic in a way that we talked a lot about Marlon Brando, and then what happened. Al's first big break is with Marlon Brando in The Godfather.
Oh, yep.
Yeah, and people say, that you both broke into films. Now, wait a minute now. I'm not Al Pacino. I wouldn't say that. We both broke into films. I didn't quite reach his status, But, yeah, he was a great kid. We laughed a lot, and he loved acting. He was poor. We both were poor. He had holes in his shoes, and he wore this old Air Force Airman Third Class Chevron coat. And he had real long hair, and but always happy and always like doing a different project. I saw him in a couple of things and off Broadway, Cafe Chino, and then even before he made The Godfather, he was on Broadway because he had done a hit off Broadway show called The Indian. There's a tiger wearing The Indian Wants the Bronx, and then he did a Broadway show called There's a Tiger Wearing Necktie. And then I sort of lost track of him, but we were not friends. We were acquaintances.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. It's such an interesting story. And I think what's wild about the acting and entertainment business is that people do cross paths fairly frequently, and then there's probably more actors that you have crossed paths with at some point, but just didn't have a large conversation with or a large memory of them, and they did go on to become, maybe not Marlon Brando, but someone, that is working, and you just don't realize that you'd work together. I'm sure that happens with a lot of different actors.
Yes.
As we begin to wind down here, what impact do you hope is the lasting memory for Officer Dorf and you as an actor, Ron?
Well, the strongest memory I have is working with Kevin Bacon, of course, and he was just so cool, and we only rehearsed the scene once, and then when we were filming it, he does something that he didn't do before. He starts to go over to my motorcycle. And I'm saying, what is this now? And so I said, hey, I followed him over, like, what are you doing, boy? I didn't say that, but the attitude was like, what are you doing? What do you want with my motorcycle here? And it worked. And so he was a very good actor and did that, which was a brilliant move because it was a moment that was alive and unrehearsed.
Well, he is Ron Milkie. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time this morning. It's been great to chat with you and talk a little bit of Friday the 13th. Yesterday, we had a Friday the 13th. Nothing unexpected happened for you?
Yes, I didn't even realize it. I got a few emails. I didn't even realize it was Friday the 13th.
Hey!
Yes. And I always enjoy hearing from anybody who wants to email me. And, they can go to IMDb Ron Milkie. Either my stage name, MILLKIE, or my real name, MILKIE, which Sean didn't know how to spell, and that's why it appears in the credits of Friday the 13th as MILKIE. But it actually was my birth name. But now I go under Ron Milkie with 2 L's.
Oh, Ron, it was great to chat with you, and I hope you have an excellent rest of your day. An exciting morning for us over here. We're glad you were able to take a little of your time and talk with us today.
Well, thank you, and I always enjoy it, Brandon.